guys? Dimension Master Studios here. How y'all doing? So, when it comes to Ninjago, by far one of the longest running mysteries that we've had when it comes to the franchise would definitely have to be the mystery of the future reflections. This is something that we saw all the way back during Season 5, 10 years ago, and to this day, we still haven't gotten a proper explanation as to what exactly they mean. However, according to Doc Wyatt, one of the head writers for Ninjago, when it comes to the future visions, they are still meant to be canon when it comes to the show, leaving it still really confusing as to what exactly the deal is when it comes to these visions and what they actually mean for the future. So in today's video, I want to take a look at the future reflections and discuss what they could potentially mean for the future of either Dragon's Rising or even Ninjago as a whole. So, let's get into this whole thing. So for starters, let's begin by actually going over what the future reflections actually were. Like I said, we initially saw the future reflections back during Season 5, specifically during the episode Grave Danger, where during the episode, when the ninja were making their way through the tomb of the first Ninjutsu master, they ended up finding these crystals which ended up showing their reflections. However, these were meant to be reflections of the future, showing us stuff that would eventually end up happening with the ninja, and to this day, it's been left a pretty big mystery as to what exactly these future reflections actually mean. Further confusing things though, following the events of Season 5, the show hasn't really done that much when it comes to the future reflections. They were brought up a couple times during the events of Skybound, with Jay specifically referencing them a few times, and the initial planned ending for Season 7 was originally going to feature a Kronks and Crux traveling to the future, where we would have actually seen the ninja looking the way they did in the future reflections. However, as we know, that ultimately didn't happen. And after that, the only thing that we've really gotten when it comes to the future reflections would be minifigures for future Jay and Nia, and that's it. Overall, the show hasn't really done that much when it comes to the future reflections, and it's left things really unclear as to what exactly they mean. So now let's actually take a look at what we see with the future reflections in order to see if we can determine what they actually mean for the future of the ninja. Now, when it comes to the future reflections, it's worth noting that we don't actually know the futures of all the ninja, because when it comes to Lloyd, we never actually saw what his reflection was, and when it comes to Cole, his future is a lot more mysterious in comparison to everyone else's. So we really only get an idea of what Kai, Jay, Zane, and Nia's futures will look like. So let's take a look at what we do have when it comes to these characters. For one big thing that we see when it comes to the ninja is them being older, with all the ninja having wrinkles on their faces, as well as Jay having facial hair. Obviously showing that when it comes to these reflections, they're meant to be at some point in the far future, much later on down the line, when the ninja are a lot older. The one exception when it comes to the characters would be Zane, with him looking the exact same way that he does normally, which makes sense because he's a robot, so he doesn't physically age. But when it comes to the rest of the characters, we can see that all of them have indeed aged. Another big thing that we see though when it comes to the ninja would be their outfits, as they aren't wearing typical gis, but instead they're wearing outfits pretty similar to what Sensei Wu wore throughout the events of the season, setting up the idea that when it comes to these outfits, they're meant to be in reference to the idea of the ninja becoming masters and them eventually having their own students at some point. Something which we are actually seeing happen during the events of Dragon's Rising, with Lloyd teaching Eren and Sora, Kai mentoring Wildfire, and Cole mentoring Frag during the Tournament of the Sources. So the idea that the ninja are going to become masters is something that we are currently seeing taking place during the events of Dragon's Rising, and the ending of Season 5 directly set up the idea of Lloyd becoming a master at some point. So it looks like when it comes to Dragon's Rising, we are finally seeing the rest of the team also become masters in addition to Lloyd. However, that's not it, because there's one other interesting thing to take note of when it comes to the actual physical designs of the ninja and their futures, and it's Jay, because as we can clearly see, Jay has an eye patch, leading to the obvious question of why does Jay have an eye patch? Well, I feel like since Jay has one, this means that when it comes to Jay, at some point in the future, he's either going to lose an eye or his eye is going to be injured, which is why he actually gets an eye patch. And during Season 6, we actually see Jay wearing an eye patch a few times, and at one point Jay even comments on him having an eye patch and this relating to his future.
An eye patch? Just like what I saw in my future. It's all coming true.
However, following the events of Season 6, we haven't seen Jay wearing an eye patch at any point, but still, thanks to this future reflection, we know that this means Jay will eventually end up getting one at some point. We just don't know why he will actually need one. So, moving on from this, we now have the big question of what exactly would this mean for the future of the ninja with them looking this way? Well, like I said, when it comes to these future reflections, they're meant to show the ninja in the far future, and given their physical appearances, specifically with their outfits, like I said earlier, this relates into the idea that the ninja will eventually end up becoming masters at some point, and they will end up gaining their own students. Which again, we're already seeing that happen at this point during Dragon's Rising. So it's possible that by the time Dragon's Rising comes to an end, we will see that when it comes to the ninja, they potentially will have a bunch of students that they are currently teaching. That's entirely a possibility, or it could just be a case where they only have a few students rather than a bunch of students like Wu had. That's also a possibility. However, that's not all, because when it comes to Jay in particular, there's a couple of other interesting things to take note of here. For one, when it comes to Jay, we see that he is a master like the rest of the team, and given that we see him with Nia, this would mean that when it comes to Jay, at some point during Dragon's Rising, hopefully during Season 3, it means that Jay is finally going to become a good guy again, and he's going to get his memories back, and he's finally going to officially rejoin the ninja team at some point. Thanks to this vision, we know that that is something that will eventually end up happening during Dragon's Rising. However, when it comes to him and Nia, that's another interesting thing to take note of. Because when it comes to Jay, again, we see him and Nia ending up together. Meaning that when it comes to Jay and Nia, the two of them at some point in the future are eventually going to get married. And yes, I did say that Jay and Nia will eventually get married at some point because the two of them aren't actually married to each other. I know that's a pretty common misconception when it comes to the fan base, given what we saw during the events of Season 10 with Jay asking Nia to be his yang, but according to Tommy Andreasen, the co-creator of Ninjago, the yin-yang concept and marriage are two completely different things, meaning that when it comes to Jay, he wasn't trying to propose to Nia throughout the events of Season 10, but it means that the two of them will most likely eventually end up getting married at some point in the future. We just don't really know when that's actually going to happen. However, when it comes to Nia being here, this also raises a couple of other questions. Specifically, when it comes to Nia, unlike the rest of the ninja, we don't see her wearing a master outfit. Which raises the question of, will this mean Nia won't become a master at some point in the future? Or is it that when it comes to this outfit, this is just her own master outfit and it just looks different in comparison to the rest of the team? Personally, I feel like it would make sense for Nia to become a master just like the rest of the team, and I feel like when it comes to the outfit that she is wearing, this is meant to be her own master outfit that she's wearing, and it just looks different in comparison to the rest of the team. Although it also raises the question that if Nia does become a master, then will her and Jay teach the same students, or will the two of them have different students? It's something that is unclear. However, when it comes to Nia being here, this also raises one other big question, and it's the question of why don't we see the other ninjas partners here? When it comes to Jay, we only see him ending up with his partner based on the future reflections. But when it comes to Zane and Kai, we don't see that. We don't see Pixel showing up as a part of Zane's reflection, and we don't see Skylar showing up as a part of Kai's reflection. So that raises the obvious question of why? How come neither of them show up alongside these ninja, but we do see that with Jay and Nia? Now, personally, I don't really think this means anything that significant, and I don't think this suggests that when it comes to Zane and Pixel, the two of them aren't going to get together, and when it comes to Kai and Skylar, the two of them aren't going to get together. Although, according to Doc Wyatt, we apparently don't want an update surrounding stuff when it comes to Kai and Skylar and their relationship, meaning it's possible that the two of them broke up. That's entirely a possibility, but at this point, we're just going to have to wait and see. And I feel like when it comes to Nia specifically being here, this was more so meant to foreshadow what would happen during Season 6, and Jay and Nia finally being able to work through their issues, and the two of them finally becoming a couple after all this time. That is just my own interpretation of things, though, and I could be totally wrong about that. that. But either way, I feel like Pixel and Skylar being here isn't anything too significant, and I don't think that means that when it comes to Zane and Kai, the two of them aren't going to end up with their partners. And finally, this leaves us with Cole. And when it comes to Cole's future, his is by far the most unclear out of all the ninja, because when Cole looks at the crystals, he doesn't actually see anything, raising the obvious question of how come Cole doesn't see his future reflection. And this has led to two big theories when it comes to the fan base. The first one states that when it comes to Cole not seeing himself, this is meant to be in reference to Skybound, with Cole learning how to turn invisible during that season, while the other theory suggests that when it comes to Cole, he's going to die at some point in the future, and that's why he doesn't see his future self. Now, as for me personally, I can honestly see where both sides are coming from here. When it comes to the idea that this vision is meant to represent Cole learning to turn invisible, I feel like that would make sense given that Cole learning how to turn invisible was a big deal during Season 6, and Cole did use that ability frequently throughout the season. Plus, also during Day of the Departed, we were introduced to the idea of Cole fading, where at certain points Cole would end up fading and he wouldn't be able to be seen or heard by any of the ninja. So it's possible that when it comes to this future vision, it was potentially in reference to that. Meanwhile, when it comes to Cole dying, that's also something that I can understand, given that when it comes to these visions, they're meant to represent the far future and not the near future. Plus, the show has hinted at the idea of Cole dying a few times, like during Day of the Departed with him fading, as I brought up earlier. And then there's also Season 10, where we saw Cole falling off the bounty into the darkness with everyone believing that he died, even though that wasn't the case. And also during Lloyd's first ever vision that he got during Dragon's Rising, Lloyd ended up seeing some gravestones, with one of them having the Ninjago symbol for C on it, which could potentially be in reference to Cole. That being said, at the exact same time, Lloyd also saw a gravestone with the Ninjago symbol for Z on it, potentially in reference to Zane, and we did actually see Zane's future self back during Season 5, so it wouldn't make sense for Cole not to show up if both he and Zane are going to die at some point, because why only show Zane and not Cole? That wouldn't make any sense if, again, both of them are going to die at some point. Then again, we don't know if when it comes to this vision, it's something that's set in stone or if it's something that can be changed. There are still a lot of unknowns when it comes to this first vision, and it's something else that is left really vague and unclear. But either way, though, when it comes to this vision, I don't think it does actually connect into the future reflections that the ninja saw here. Now, when it comes to which these theories that I believe, personally, I'm leaning more towards the idea that Cole not showing up here is meant to be in reference to him learning how to turn invisible, and also him fading during the events of Day of the Departed. That's personally what I believe, as I think it makes more sense than Cole dying at some point in the future, but that is also entirely a possibility and it could happen. But again, I don't think that's the case, and again, for me personally, I think this is more so in reference to the idea of Cole learning how to turn invisible. And so that's pretty much all I got for you guys. Overall, when it comes to the future reflections, while there is still a lot of things that we don't know when it comes to them, based on the little bits of information that we can see in the future reflections, I feel like we can get a general idea as to stuff that's going to end up happening with the ninja at some point. And while I don't think we're going to see all the stuff with the future reflections happen during Dragon's Rising, I do think that eventually we are going to see these things happen at some point. It could happen in Dragon's Rising, or it could happen at some points further on down the line in another Ninjago show. That's also possible. But at this point, there are still a lot of things that we don't know when it comes to the future visions, and really, it's anyone's guess as to what's actually going to happen with these things and when we are going to see them. Although, again, when it comes to Dragon's Rising, it is setting up some of the stuff when it comes to the future reflections, specifically with the ninja having their own students, but as for other things, we aren't seeing that yet. But we'll just have to wait and see what happens. And so that's pretty much all I got for you guys. So tell me down below what do you guys think. Tell me what are your guys' thoughts when it comes to the future reflections, and tell me, was there anything that I left out? Tell me down below, and I hope you guys enjoy. Later, guys. This is Dimension Master Studios, signing off.